In this tutorial, we're going to go over how to 3D model the Titan 93L. Let's first take a look at their drawing so we better understand what we're going to be creating. In our upper left-hand corner, we have our front view. And if you look closely at our front view, we've got this feature in the center here, and that's actually a face groove. In the exact center of our part, we have a tapped hole. Moving over to the right-hand side here, we have a couple corner fillets and some chamfers stated. Below it, we have our isometric view, further clarifying that face groove. And then below our front view, we have our section view with all of our measurements. So let's jump over to Fusion 360 and let's create this part. I'm over here in Fusion 360. This particular part is a Revolve part, so we're going to create half of it. So very first thing that I'm going to start with is a line. We have our triad here with our three different planes we can sketch onto. I'm going to sketch on my top plane here, and I'm going to anchor my line right off of my origin. This line needs to be 1 inch, 250 thousandths in length, and then press enter on the keyboard. Afterwards, I'm going to go back to L on the keyboard for lines. And I'm going to add in the geometry that makes up this flange here. L on the keyboard. And I'm going to add in the geometry that makes up the end of our part, like so. In between these endpoints, there's an arc that fits there, but we'll add that in a little bit later. According to our print, there's a relationship between this endpoint and the outside of our flange. We're going to go to our constraints and down to horizontal and vertical constraint. We're going to click on the endpoint here and the endpoint here, indicating that they are horizontal to each other. After we have our constraint in place, we're going to add in some dimensions. So D on the keyboard. We're always going to be referencing off of our origin here. First one I'm going to reference off of is our origin down to this point, and dragging our mouse up, giving us a horizontal measurement of 250 thousandths. Back to our origin and to this point now, this needs to be 1 inch. Now that we have those two measurements in place, we're going to add in our vertical measurements from our origin to the end of our part. This measurement needs to be 475 thousandths. And then lastly, from this point to this point here, this needs to be 225 thousandths. Now that we have our geometry dimension, we're going to add in that arc. So create down to arc over to 3-point arc. We're going to click on that first point here to land one of our points there. Then we're going to drag our mouse in, adding in an arc. Afterwards, we're going to go back to D on the keyboard to give this arc a dimension. We're going to click on the outside of that arc and type in the dimension of 1 inch, 671 thousandths. I'm going to move this measurement in a little bit so you guys can see it a little bit better as I move on. In addition to having the outside profile here, we have 3 circles that are kind of on this arc here. So I'm going to go C on the keyboard. I'm not 100% certain if they're on that arc. So I'm going to place my circles over here off of the arc. And then these circles are all equal to each other. So I'm going to add a constraint in. Constraints down to equal. The outside perimeter of this circle to this perimeter are equal, and then the perimeter of that one to that one are equal. Now that I've got my constraints in place, I can add a dimension to one of them. And this dimension needs to be 65 thousandths. Now that I have my 3 circles dimension, I need to give them a location. I'm going to go off of my origin to this very first circle, dragging my mouse up. And this location is 450 thousandths. The second one, referencing off of our origin, going up again, is 610 thousandths. And then the third one, again referencing from our origin, needs to be 770 thousandths. I'm going to move my dimension line up a little bit, make it a little bit easier to read for you guys. Now that I have my horizontal measurements in, I need to add in my vertical measurements, D on the keyboard. Again, referencing off of our origin. This particular measurement is 332 thousandths. The second one here is 395. And then the third one, again, referencing off of our origin, is 440 thousandths. Now that we have our 3 circles in place, we also have a big circle up here in the front of our part, so we're going to add that in. C on the keyboard. Drawing the circle out here. And this circle has a diameter of 831 thousandths. And its center here has a relationship. It is going to be horizontal to the point here, or the center line here. So we're going to add in that horizontal constraint, anchoring them. And then I'm going to go back to dimensions, again measuring off of my origin to my center now. And this needs to be 1 inch, 274 thousandths. I'm going to tidy up my workspace like so. Now that we have our basic geometry in place, we can actually finish our sketch. And then we're going to revolve this part by going to Create and down to Revolve. The geometry that we're going to select is this geometry here, these circles, and we are going to exclude this geometry. We're going to select our axis in our pop-up window. We're going to choose the center line of our part, orbiting this part around, and then press OK. Now that we have our solid body, we're going to start adding in some of the features that we missed. Very first thing that we're going to add in is there's a radius down here, so I'm going to go to Modify and down to Fillet. I'm going to click on this line here, and that fillet's got a dimensions of 60 thousandths. In addition, each one of these little circular bosses here has a fillet that kind of comes off of the part and kind of blends it in. So we're going to right click and repeat our fillets. This time we're clicking on the outside of this circular boss. And if you misclick on something, you can always click on it again and it will deselect it. Notice we have 6 edges that we're going to fillet. This time this dimension is 20 thousandths of an inch. And see how that fillet kind of blends the whole thing to the arc there. Now that we have that in place, we're going to flip the part over. We're going to take a look at the front of our part here. The front of our part, we have that tapped hole, and we also have that face groove. We're going to put that face groove in right now. So C on the keyboard. I'm going to click on the front of the part here. Now I'm going to anchor it right from the origin. And I'm going to draw two circles. One is going to be 850 thousandths in diameter. C again on the keyboard. And then the other circle is going to be 650 thousandths. And then enter. I'm going to right click, press and pull. Now I'm going to choose this area that we just pressed and pulled. And this needs to go down 70 thousandths, so I'm going to put minus 0.07 for 70 thousandths. And then now we have that face groove. While we're here, we're going to put in that tapped hole. I'm going to go over to my browser window and turn sketch number 2, its visibility back on. And then I'm going to go H on the keyboard for hole. And I'm going to turn the visibility of my origin off. And I'm going to choose the center of those circles I just created. That way that hole is nice and concentric to the circles. In our pop-up window here, we're going to be using a countersink because it's giving us a countersink diameter. This hole goes all the way through the part, so I'm going to go to Extents to All. The countersink diameter is 380 thousandths, and its angle is 45 degrees. Well, when we're using a countersink, we're going from side to side, so we actually are going to double that. They call that an included angle. So we're going to be using 90 degrees. Jumping down to our size, we are going to be choosing the decimal equivalent of 3/8, which is 375 thousandths. Our designation is 3/8 16. And our classification is 2B. We are going to turn modeled on to model these threads. And then lastly, we are going to press OK to lock all of our measurements into place. Afterwards, I can turn the visibility of our sketch off, and we can take a look at our part. Notice we have our chamfer, and we have that helical feature coming down. One thing I'm noticing is my threads are going all the way down to the bottom of the part. But if you look at our print, it indicates we only need 350 thousandths. So I'm going to come down to my history markers, right click and edit feature. And what we're going to turn on is thread offsets. We're going to go to offset threads. And notice this dimension lines appeared. We're going to change this dimension right here to 350 thousandths. And then OK. Notice if I look at my hole now, my threads do not go all the way through. That's more or less what I'm looking for. While I'm here, this edge right here that I just clicked on, that needs a little corner radius on it. So I'm going to go to Modify and down to Fillet. We're going to click on that line, and then this radius needs to be at 25 thousandths. Almost done with this part. I always save my chamfers to the very end. We're going to go to Modify and down to Chamfer. We need to cut or chamfer all these sharp edges off. So we're going to choose this inside of our bore here, the outside of the part, the outside of our flange. We're going to orbit our part over where our face groove is and choose those two lines. And we're going to chamfer this at 10 thousandths of an inch, breaking those sharp edges off. And then press OK. This is a good opportunity. Double check your part. Make sure that you've got all the features as stated on the print. And this concludes how to 3D model the Titan 93L.